Hi there everyone, welcome to my latest Salamangreat build. If you're watching this, then there's a good chance you're either crazy like me and are trying to make this deck somehow work in the current format, or you just missed the good old days. I have built this deck for playing against tier elements, while also considering other strong decks like Flunderies or cards like Shifter, D-Fissure, that kind of thing. Just before I get into the deck profile, I want to quickly talk about kind of the things in the format that affect Salad and the ones that don't. So Salamangreat benefits from not being hurt by the Bestials at all. They're all fire, and most of your extra deck monsters are not dark or light. And having our stuff milled by the Ishizu cards means that for a start, they may not go for as many big plays on their turn, but also means that we might benefit from stuff being milled as well. On the flip side, Salamangreat is most hurt by all the banished cards and the Ishizu shufflers. And because of how many cards your opponent can use to play on your own turn, such as Bestials from their own grave or like Havness, I don't think going for Access Code OTK line is as good or as easy as it used to be. So you need alternate win conditions and a way to apply pressure to the game state without going for the win con. Basically, I'm gearing this build towards a control variant, in which you focus on looping your resources and outgrinding your opponent. To start off, I'll go through the Salamangreat lineup. So we've got 2 Jack Jaguar, we play 1 copy of Falco, we play 3 copies of Spinny, we play 2 copies of Foxy, and we play the 1 Gazelle. So I'll quickly explain these ratios. They're pretty standard, to be honest, and I only play the ones that do something in grave as a way of maybe deterring or benefiting from these Shizu cards. The exception to this is obviously Gazelle, but you need to run Gazelle. Having said that, seeing Gazelle get negated when going first is almost never that bad, as we aren't building the traditional Salamangreat endboard anymore. Jack Jaguar is probably the most important Salad card in terms of recursion, as he shuffles back your extra deck monsters and allows you just keep applying pressure turn after turn. Spinny is at 3 because he's excellent to have milled, and I'm also not playing Stalio, and I'll get onto that later. So his grave effect becomes a one-time use, so I want to have at least 2 of them in grave so I can use them over the course of the game. For generic Cyberus cards, I'm playing 3 Parallel Exceed, and the main normal summon of the deck, I'm playing 3 Flame Buffalo. Parallel Exceed is just really good for making rank 4s and helps your link climb, and Buffalo's draw 2 is still very, very strong, especially when you want to dig in to match up specific cards. Parallel Exceed as well is also good into decks like Flunderies, just kind of gives you a very good matchup against rogue decks. Next for the hand traps, we're playing 3 Bestial Magnamut, we're playing 3 Druis Worm, we're playing 3 Bell, and we're also playing 2 Ash Blossom. So Ash does something against every deck pretty much, and being able to recur it with Sunlight Wolf means you can slowly chip away at your opponent and just kind of outgrind them. Very relevant against tier when they try to use Havness on your turn as well. It's not nearly as impactful as it used to be, but I think in Salamangreat especially, it's still worth playing. We've got Ghost Spell as well. This can be used offensively against tier to stop their fusion summons, but also it can be used defensively against Bestials when going for OTK, or for stopping Medora or Keldo as well. With regards to the Bestials, you basically have to run these, but they are useful for the deck as well. They help OTK, make link monsters, and just generate advantage. They do conflict a little bit with Transcode Talker and Splash Mage, but for the most part, you will be using these on your opponent's turn. And if you're having to use the Bestials on your own turn, then chances are that going for Transcode or Splash Mage is not the right move anyway. For this build in particular, the Bestials play a vital role for my end board when going first against tier elements, but I'll explain this when I get to the extra deck. For the spells, I'm playing 3 Salamangreat Circle, 3 copies of Signet Mining, I'm also playing 3 Forbidden Droplet, 2 Pot of Desires, and the 1 Salamangreat Sanctuary. These are fairly standard choices and ratios. Droplet isn't always played, but I've really liked it in this deck. You draw so many cards that have also got grave effects, which is what you want when pairing with Droplet. It just lets Salad go second, because if you don't draw your hand traps, going second with Salad can be quite difficult. I'm also not playing any of the Salamangreat traps for 2 reasons. Firstly, I don't think they're good enough anymore, and secondly, I don't like ending on Salamangreat monsters because they do nothing. So that means if you open Droplet and you add Salamangreat Sanctuary, 9 times out of 10 you don't need to use Sanctuary unless you are hard making a Heat Soul with Jack Jaguar, which means you're just getting free discard fodder for Droplet. Lastly, for the trap cards, in the main deck, I'm just playing 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. This is a really strong hand trap. It conflicts in theory with the Bestials, but you're always using it before the Bestials against most decks. I would consider Veiler because he's good to draw off Heat Soul, whereas Imperm isn't. but him being light is a real downside because we really want to try and shut off our opponent's Bestial Engine with this deck. Imperm is also just really good going second, drawing off the top and kind of imperming maybe a Barrier Statue or Will Callus, for example. Onto the extra deck. With the Link ones, I play 2 copies of Balinx and 1 copy of Lingaribo. Balinx only ever need to because I rarely use his banish effect due to not often ending on a Salamangreat Link. And Lingaribo, he's used to make Heat Soul in some lines and is also nice into the tier board to stop cards like Sulliok or even just basic trap decks such as Labyrinth that just, applies a lot of pressure. For Link 2s, I'm playing 1 copy of Sunlight Wolf, 1 copy of IP Masquerena, 1 copy of Splash Mage, and 1 copy of Update Jammer. So Sunlight Wolf, I'm only playing 1 because I don't need more. Circle is the only Salamangreat spell that is worth recurring. However, if I activate Circle and it resolves, chances are that I'm getting to my full Salamangreat engine anyway, and I can dump most of my Salad cards in grave in 1 turn. So I only use Sunlight Wolf's effect to add back a fire monster from grave. And because of Jack Jaguar, I can just shuffle him back into the extra deck, summon him back next turn. So I've never really found myself needing the second one. Both Splash Mage and Update Jammer are fairly standard, but IP, this is what I tried to make going first against tier, along with enough monsters to go into a particular Link 4. For the Link 3 lineup, we've got 1 copy of Decode Talker Heat Soul, 1 copy of Transcode Talker, and we play 2 copies of Salamangreat Heat Leo. So Heat Soul and Transcode Talker, they're self-explanatory, they're pretty much staple in Salamangreat now. I actually think Heat Leo is quite good this format, especially if you're looking for a more control-based style of play. Shuffling back 2 spells or traps is nice, and his attack reducing effect is neat when going up against tier elements to stop their grave effects from triggering. So if you make 2 Heat Leos, you shuffle back 2 of their spells or traps, or at least bait them out, and then with the second Heat Leo, you can reduce the attack of one of their big monsters and just attack into it. They don't get any grave effects. Link 4s, I'm playing 1 copy of Topologic Zeraboros and 1 Access Code Talker. Access Code is still a staple, and he will steal games for you. Running more boss monsters allows me to use him sometimes just as a board wipe as well, whereas in old versions of the deck, if you only ran 1 big Link monster as your win condition, but your only boss monster, you would have to choose very carefully when you brought Access Code Talker out. But because we run a few other big Link monsters that can also help OTK or win the game, we can actually just use Access Code Talker to wipe a board and just apply a lot of pressure early on. However, the star of this deck is Topologic Zeraboros. He is the deck's answer to basically lots of different situations. Against tier elements, if you open a Bestial in hand, then the end board goal is usually an IP with enough material to make a Zeraboros. So the best one would be either a Heat Soul or a Sunlight Wolf on top of the IP. Then at the right moment, you summon Zeraboros and you trigger his effect using a Bestial, and you just banish the entire field. Ideally, it's a Magnamut because you will add the Druisworm in the end phase. And in the standby phase when Zeraboros comes back, you can attempt to summon the Druisworm and try and activate Zeraboros again to force out whatever your opponent was able to put up after the mass banish. Basically, you can really abuse Zeraboros' effect to ruin your opponent's board and resources. And when you're banishing so much against decks that run like Dimensional Fissure, Desires, D-Shifter, then Zeraboros can get quite beefy and quite easily OTK. So he's kind of like an answer to both of the main strategies in the meta right now. Lastly, we play 2 Xyz monsters. Play the 1 copy of Baguska, and we also play 1 copy of Wallow. Baguska, I'm running him over Dweller because Dweller is only really good against tier elements, and Baguska still hits vital parts of the deck, such as Kalos, or it just means their end board isn't that great. They have to kind of use a Sulliok to get rid of it, for example. And Baguska is also good against the decks that counter tier, such as Flunderies and Exorcister, and it's better into rogue matchups such as Sword Soul and Despia. Baguska going second into a board is nice too. And lastly, Baguska is our best bet if we get D-Shifted, for example. He'll keep you alive for a turn, and then you can just go about your plays like nothing happened. The only card in your deck that Baguska affects is Gazelle, and I don't count Parallel Exceed because I'm assuming that's how we make Baguska as well. Basically, there are no downsides to playing Baguska. Now, Wallow, this is the Mirage Stalio replacement. His attack boost means that you don't rely on your graveyard as much for OTK, and he's easy to get out and apply quick pressure. If tier elements, for example, have a Shuffler in grave, he can remove it before you go into your Salad play. So if you Bestial them on their turn and you get to add your Druisworm, you summon your Druisworm on their turn as well, possibly, or maybe save it for your own, and then you make the Wallow. You still got your full hand of Salamangreat cards or your Cybers engine, so you can use Wallow to just bait out some negates and then go with your plays. And the reason I don't play Stalio is I just don't think he does enough anymore. Bouncing like a Real Callus, for example, is nice, but you never really resolve it, and you're committing 3 engine cards just for 1 bounce. And you know your opponent's going to get it back next turn anyway. if you're making Stalio, you do have to get good value out of him, and in order to do that, I think you have to use both of his effects. But because the first effect locks you into fire, you're basically creating a really easy choke point for your opponent, and you're limiting further plays that turn, because if you're locked into fire, there's not much else you can do after bouncing to get rid of your opponent's board. For the side deck, the monster lineup is 1 copy of Nightmare Corruptor Ibli and 1 copy of Microcoder. Both Ibli and Coder are excellent to side in Salad, as because they are dark, your opponent not seeing them game 1 means they'll likely at least side out most of their Bestials, which makes it safe for you to use your Ibli and your Microcoder. Ibli as well, going first, just locks your opponent out of anything that's link summoning, and there's no good deck at the minute that really does a lot of link summoning. And Microcoder, it adds you Signet Mining, can be used from hand, and also it adds the Signet Conflict, which I'm also running in the side deck. For spells, I'm running 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster, 2 copies of Lightning Storm, and 3 Cosmic Cyclone. This is all just back row hate. Side these in against Flunder, sometimes even Tear Elements as well, because you can still plus, and then once you get rid of the back row, you know what you're up against. It's just kind of generic utility. For the trap cards, 1 copy of Silent Conflict, 3 copies of Rivalry of Warlords, and 3 copies of Evenly Matched. Silent Conflict is, I think, the best counter trap in the game. When Fairy Tale Snow was legal, for example, I think Silent Conflict was the only card in the game that could respond to its summon attempt and permanently stop it. It's just really good. I don't think I've ever actually lost a game where I've been able to use this card's effect. It's just super powerful, especially because it stops. It's like a pseudo call by the grave, it's a banish, and it's an omni negate. Rivalry of Warlords, we're pretty much all Cybers except for the Wallow and the Baguska and the Bestials, but you'd side this into games where you maybe wouldn't Bestial as much. So against Sprite, for example, Rivalry of Warlords is a lot better than the Bestials, so you take them out and you put the Rivalry in. And Evenly Matched, yeah, this is for back row decks, this is for Flunderies, just really good as well. If your opponent sees it, say you're against Flunderies, and your opponent sees it game 2, in game 3, if you don't open it, you can attempt to go to battle phase, and that'll bait out their trap cards, so you don't get the Book of Moon effect, and you can play from there. So it's a nice little trick that sometimes works against Flunderies. That rounds out the deck profile. I've tried to do something a bit different than what you normally see with Salamangreat, because I think, given how much power creep has occurred and how little support Cyberus and Salamangreat has got in the last few sets, I think you kind of have to try something that's not as traditional as the old builds. Salamangreat is still a really good deck if you know what you're doing. It's really fun to get into those turn 4, turn 5, turn 6 games where you're both kind of recurring your resources, and you know every slight misplay counts. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and have a great day.